to introduce today's keynote speaker. Our speaker today is Professor Mary Ellen Guy from University of Colorado, Denver. Professor Guy is a true pioneer in public service research. Her groundbreaking work on social equity and emotional labor is internationally renowned. She has published numerous journal articles and books on those topics. And I'm sure many of you here today are already familiar with her research. Beyond her scholarship, Professor Guy also showed great leadership in our academic community. To name just a few, she served as the president of the American Society for Public Administration and president of the Southern Political Science Association. She also served as the editor for scholarly journals such as Review of Public Personnel Administration and more recently, the Journal of Social Equity and Public Administration. In a lecture today, she'll share her valuable insight with us on social equity. So the title of the lecture today is Toward a More Equitable Public Administration, Social Equity, Diversity, and the Human Side of Governance. I hope you all enjoy this session. Please welcome Professor Mary Ellen Guy.
Hello. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Thank you so much to CAPA for this invitation to come and speak to you today about a topic that I think I fret about almost every waking minute. But let me tell you first, I had the pleasure of being here at this exact conference 15 years ago, and it is fabulous to be back now and to take a look at what looks the same and what looks very new and refreshed. And it is fun to be here, so thank you to the association for this invitation. But it is so absolutely essential that we pay attention to the relationship between governance and social equity and the responsibility that we as public administrators share in protecting both and in advancing both. So what I want to do today is talk to you, just to begin with a very simple but powerful idea, and that is that good government is defined less by elections and institutions and laws, and more by whether people experience fairness, dignity, and the opportunity for them to live their daily lives. And even the best governments are flawed. They are not static. And a government that's working well now may not work well after the next election. This is always a work in progress. So let me begin. If you remember nothing else from my remarks, please remember these 5 points. This is what I'm going to elaborate on in the next few minutes. The first is that social equity is a key element in democratic government. It's a comes with. You can't have one without the other. The second point is that democracy is under threat by authoritarian forces. This is the case around the globe. The third point is that these forces fight against social equity by elevating a few powerful people and trying to subjugate the rest. My fourth point is that narratives are a powerful force either for or against equitable policies and practices. And the final point is that achieving social equity is a never-ending struggle. So let me define what I'm talking about. And that is that social equity is the fair and just formation and implementation of public policy, the equitable management and distribution of public services, and the commitment to fairness, justice, and equity in all dimensions of government. And democracy is a system of government in which power is vested in the people. Citizens have the authority to make decisions about how they are governed, either directly or through elected representatives. And laws apply equally to everyone, and individual freedoms such as speech and religion and assembly are respected. Each citizen has an equal vote, and leaders are chosen through elections. That's what I mean when I'm talking about democracy. So my first point is that social equity is not merely a policy goal. It is not a secondary concern. It is not an optional aspiration that governments may pursue when convenient. Social equity, as I see it, is a foundational element of democratic governance, and it has to be a consideration in all of public administration. So this is where we come in. If you are familiar with Luther Gulick's work, when he was asked to come up with some shorthand way of capturing all of the elements of public administration, he developed this acronym, POSDCORB. It's planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. At its most basic, democracy is built on the principle that all people possess equal worth, equal rights, and equal voice. But these ideals remain hollow unless they are translated into lived reality. And that's where we come in as public administrators. When people face systemic barriers because of gender or nationality or social class or disability, or whether they are rural or urban, then their formal equality exists only on paper. A democracy does not exist when large segments of the population are excluded from opportunity, from influence, and from fair treatment. So, the way to handle this, and what every administrator can be doing, and the way we need to be teaching our students to make sure that we are advancing social equity in our work, is to ask a question. Ask the question, in terms of planning and organizing, are all points of view being heard before decisions are made? In terms of staffing, do job applicants have equal opportunity to be considered? Do employees have an equal opportunity to be promoted, to gain the training and development they need? In terms of directing and coordinating, are those affected by the programs involved in decisions about where the program is delivered, how it is delivered, when it is delivered? In terms of reporting, this is all about data. We don't know where the inequities exist if we're not keeping track of them. This is why it's so important for government to collect the data, accurate data, and make it transparent and make it available for everyone. And in terms of budgeting, the question is, do budget priorities reflect the values that emphasize equity? Social equity is about ensuring that public institutions serve all people fairly, correcting imbalances that leave some groups behind while others benefit disproportionately. It is about access to education, to economic opportunity, to justice, to political participation. And in this sense, equity is not about giving unfair advantage. It's about removing unfair disadvantage. More importantly, social equity strengthens democracy Why? Because when people believe the system treats them fairly, they are more likely to participate, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to feel engaged, they're more likely to talk with their neighbors about the system, they're more likely to invest in their communities, they're more likely to trust the institutions. But when inequity persists, when people consistently feel like they are marginalized, then trust erodes, participation declines, cynicism grows. So let me be clear, democracy depends on people believing that it works for them, and it cannot work for them without equity. My second point is that we're at a time when democracies around the globe are experiencing growing pressure. The largest democracy, India, is fighting forces similar to what is happening in the US. Both are led by strongmen populists who have a cult-like following and describe themselves in godlike terms. And the Achilles heel, the weakest point of a strong democracy, is inequity. When citizens lose faith that the system is fair, they fall prey to narcissists who promise them anything to get their vote. Inequity undermines democracy. Authoritarian forces come in many forms, some subtle, some overt, but they share a common characteristic, and they challenge the very principles that sustain democratic life. You've made fabulous progress here in Korea, and it's what I'm giving you these warning signs to say, don't let this happen to you. In the US, we had a fabulously functioning democracy for generations, and we took it for granted. And now we find ourselves in a tremendous backsliding situation where we're learning slowly not to take for granted a good system. So authoritarian forces are movements, leaders, ideologies that seek to concentrate power, to weaken accountability, and to diminish the role of ordinary citizens. These forces present themselves usually as easy solutions to frustration, instability, inequality, and they promise order, strength, and decisiveness, and quick solutions, none of which will happen. What they ultimately deliver is a narrowing of power, a silencing of dissent, and a reshaping of institutions to serve a few rather than many. So my message to you is that democracy is not guaranteed. It is not self-sustaining. It requires constant care because there are always headwinds. And when I say democracy is under threat, I do not mean that it vanishes overnight. It doesn't. It erodes gradually through small changes that come to be seen as normal. So let me talk you through 4 signs that we can see when, in the US, we look in the rearview mirror and say, what has gotten us to where we are? One is a weakening of checks and balances. What it's very apparent now is that it is better to have conflict between the branches of government rather than acquiescence. In the US at this time, we're seeing acquiescence from the majority on the Supreme Court and from Congress. It's beginning to change, but that when there are no checks and balances, democracy does not work. A second sign is a diminishing respect for independent regulatory commissions that can make judgments independent of the executive. A third warning sign is a spreading distrust of the processes that ensure fairness, such as what we're seeing in the US when We saw President Trump a year ago fire 17 inspectors general in one tweet. The inspectors general in the US are a job where there's one assigned to each ministry, each federal department, and that person's job is to receive reports of wrongdoing and to investigate them. When the executive does away with those sorts of watchdogs, that's a warning sign. And then the fourth sign is a growing tolerance for unequal treatment, such as we see when government stops collecting data or stops making it transparent, when it stops tracking inequalities in the workforce or income disparities. Without data, those who are disadvantaged, they cannot even make a credible claim that they are treated unequally. Data is so important. So these changes happen in small steps, but taken together, they fundamentally alter the character of government. This is what is threatening American democracy today, and I do not want to see it happen here. I want to take you to the third point now, where I want to connect how these forces affect social equity. It is direct and it is profound that authoritarian systems oppose social equity because their rule relies on inequality. In other words, all of these things fit together. They're all linked like a chain. These systems elevate a narrow concentration of power, either in families or small in-group or wealthy business owners. And to maintain that concentration of power, they must limit the ability of people to challenge it. Challenge is, it's not fun, it's protest, but in fact, it's the healthiest thing that happens in a democracy. So you can end up, that's not what I wanted. You have a small number of people who gain increased authority and influence and wealth, and the rest of the population experiences reduced voice, reduced access, and reduced opportunity. This is not accidental, it is purposeful, because inequality stabilizes concentrated power. When people are divided economically, socially, and politically, they're less able to organize, less able to engage in collective action, less able to demand accountability, less able to challenge authority. In contrast, social equity empowers people. It strengthens participation. It strengthens voice, and it raises expectations of fairness. It reinforces the idea that power resides not in the leader, but with the people themselves. And that is precisely what authoritarian systems cannot tolerate. So they act in ways that undermine equity. They weaken protections for vulnerable populations. They control who make decisions. They diminish transparency so they can hide how money and benefits are being distributed. They shape institutions to serve loyalty rather than fairness. In doing so, they substitute the democratic promise of shared governance with a system of selective privilege that subordinates most people. And that takes me to the fourth point. Keep in mind, these transformations, this is what we've learned in the US, these transformations do not occur openly. Authoritarians do not openly argue that they oppose fairness or want inequality. Instead, they rely on something far more subtle and powerful, and that is the narrative. If any of you have friends in the marketing profession, that the marketers know narratives so much better than public administrationists know it. It's time for us to take lessons from our marketing friends. Narratives define problems and shape how people think about policies, institutions, and how they think about each other. Narratives influence what people think of as fair or unfair, necessary or dangerous, possible or impossible. And in particular, these authoritarian forces use narratives that undermine support for social equity. So here are some common patterns. One narrative reframes equity as unfairness. Policies designed to address inequality are portrayed as favoritism or special treatment. Correcting unfairness is reframed at creating a new injustice. A second narrative creates a mindset of scarcity by claiming that solutions to public problems are zero-sum games where somebody has to lose in order for someone else to gain. People are told that opportunities are limited. The third narrative questions legitimacy. Efforts to expand access, whether in voting or education or good-paying jobs or safe housing, are framed as illegitimate, unnecessary, or even harmful. And a fourth narrative elevates strong leadership over inclusive governance. So listening to different voices and points of view is contrasted with the simplicity of centralized decision-making. Inclusion is portrayed as weakness, and concentration of power is portrayed as efficiency and strength. These narratives are powerful because they grab a hold of people's real concerns, of their real anxieties, their economic anxieties, their worries about social change, their uncertainty about the future, about the job market, and they redirect those concerns, those anxieties, away from systemic issues and toward division, dividing one group against another. This makes it very difficult to build consensus around equitable solutions. When people accept these narratives, support for policies that promote fairness and inclusion erode. So my final point is about vigilance. If social equity is essential to democracy, and if authoritarian forces actively undermine it, then what must be done? What are we to do? The answer is both simple and it is demanding. It's all about vigilance. It's all about paying attention. Here, in the US, in Europe, in India, in South America, anywhere democracy is trying to succeed, you have to be vigilant. It is an active, requires an active, ongoing commitment. And it applies to those who work in government, those who teach about government, and those who are governed, the public itself. And let me speak about vigilance within government. Public institutions, each ministry, must continuously examine whether its policies and practices and programs promote fairness or whether they are perpetuating inequality. This means always asking those questions and teaching our students to ask these questions. Is there transparency in decision-making? Is there accountability for outcomes? Are diverse points of view included when decisions are made? Are those affected by policies listened to? These are the questions programs must ask. And now to the difficult questions that leaders and public servants must ask, and teaching our students to ask are these: who benefits from this policy? Who is left out? What barriers are present? What barriers are being addressed? As you see from these questions, being committed to equity means moving beyond intention to outcome. Beyond intention to outcome. It's easy to intend equity. It's far more complicated to pay attention to the outcomes and always working on those. Well, that was vigilance within government. I want to turn to vigilance among the public. The strength of democracy depends on the public. Democracy is not something that happens to people. It is something people make happen and something people hold on to, which means paying attention to how power is used, questioning narratives that divide or mislead, supporting institutions that uphold fairness, and engaging in civic life even when it feels difficult or imperfect or inconvenient. It also means recognizing that equity is not a zero-sum game. A more equitable society is not one where some lose and others gain. It is one where the system itself becomes more just, more effective, and more legitimate for everyone. Maintaining democracy is a shared responsibility. It doesn't belong just to the elected official. It doesn't belong just to the heads of the ministries. Preservation of democracy and the pursuit of social equity are fundamentally intertwined. You can't have one without the other. A democracy without equity becomes fragile, susceptible to erosion, distrust, and division. Equity without democratic accountability is not sustainable. Together, equity and democracy form a mutually reinforcing relationship where equity strengthens democracy and democracy enables equity. But both require effort. Both require commitment. Both require persistence. And both require vigilance. The institutions that work best are the hidden ones, those shared beliefs that no one questions. The belief in fairness, the right to vote, the right to express opinions. Democracy is like a relay race. This is the way I see it, where one generation passes the baton to the next, meaning passes the norms, the values, and the expectations of what government is supposed to be. So let me offer a closing reflection. Throughout history, democratic societies have been defined not only by their ideals, but by their willingness to struggle toward those ideals, even when the path is difficult. In fact, in the American case, history is more about the struggle than the achievement. Both true democracy and true equity are moving targets. They're always moving targets. They change as demographics change, as generations change, as the economy thrives or tumbles. Progress is never guaranteed, it's never permanent, and even when it is made, resting on your laurels will bring losses. The journey is an uphill climb. The future of democracy is shaped by choices. Choices made by individuals, by ministries, by elected officials, by communities, by neighborhoods, by the research we as scholars pursue. These choices revolve around three considerations: whether we accept inequality as normal or challenge it, whether we accept simple narratives that divide us or seek deeper understanding, and whether we remain passive or choose to engage. In the end, democracy is sustained by laws, by leaders, and by a shared commitment to fairness, participation, and mutual responsibility. Good government is about equity. So, back to where I started, I urge you to continue to reaffirm your commitment to democracy, to equity, just as I urge my fellow Americans to do that, to get with the program, to lean in, to work toward, because democracy is always an incomplete sentence. The work is never done. It is never complete. It's a moving target. There's always work to be done. Believing in democracy is not enough. It's operationalizing it that is required. It's required of us as we teach our students. It's required of all the public service professionals doing the work. Social equity is not merely an aspiration. It is a necessity. There are and always will be forces that seek to undermine it. It is up to us to remain vigilant, to be aware, so that democracy and the equity it requires not only endures, but thrives. So to return to where I began, the 5 takeaways I hope you will find useful are that social equity is central to democratic governments. Democracy is, that's point 1. Point 2, democracy is under threat. It is now, it always is to some degree, but there are times when it is even more under threat. Narratives are powerful forces for advancing or hindering equity. We as a field can do a better job getting our narratives right so that they are compelling messages. And vigilance is required on all of our parts because achieving social equity is a never-ending journey. It's a hard job, but it's a job worth doing. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Guy. Now it's time for Q&A. So I'd like to open the floor for questions. Actually, we are running a little late, so I think we only have about 10 minutes. So if you really, really want to ask a question, raise your hand. Okay.
Thank you for your great lecture. I've had a lot of insights from your words. My name is Sungju Moon. I'm from Hanyang University. I'm studying for my MPA. And well, you told us a lot about democracy and social equity, but I would like to ask if you have any specific advices or suggestions to the next generation on keeping democracy and to develop it more, because well, I think as time passes, the new generations are losing their interest in politics and social issues more and more. So I think I wanted to ask you if you have any ideas on how to keep the interest to our generations. Thank you.
That's a great question, and generational change brings a need for how we change our narratives, how we talk about the issue, how we understand the issue. But my very biggest warning is don't go for the easy answer. It is so seductive to go for an easy answer. When someone promises that everything will be fine, just elect them, it's no. If it seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. and how to hold on to that awareness that democracy takes work, but and it's never perfect. So you will always, it's easy to find where the inequities are, but it's so important to shine the light on the pieces that work and say, I want more of that. And it's certainly in the US, there's been such discouragement. There are terrible problems. College graduates now are having a double of a time finding a job. And the easy answer is, oh, well, we need a different form of government. We need a strongman president who will just dictate things. Well, it doesn't work. It works just long enough to get elected, and then they crash the entire system. Stay away from the seductive, easy answer. Think hard, work hard, talk to people.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, next question. Over there. By the way, I got a message from Professor Song of the Kappa president. He said he didn't make it to this session due to other event, so please excuse his absence.
Hello, my name is Jacob Reedhead. I'm visiting from Taiwan National Zhengzhou University. A very sensitive issue in South Korea is the political retribution when there's a change in power.
That's right. That's right.
And I think in the United States we may be facing this as well.
Absolutely
in the
are.
coming years. How important is prosecutions, investigations, striking that balance? What do you recommend? What balance do you recommend in the United States, as if the Democrats come back into power after 3 years, to restoring trust in institutions, but at the same time not widening partisan divide?
See, and your question takes us right to the human condition. Revenge is such a juicy action, and it never ends well. And so already there are Democrats in the U.S. are saying, just wait till after the midterm elections in November, and things will be different, and they'll control the House and the Senate. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But there is a desire to get revenge, to get payback, but it does not work well. And the best, there are lessons all through history of why it's better to be collaborative, to work together, and to try to focus on the common interest. And we saw that with the Marshall Plan after World War II. We've seen it more recently. It requires us to override that very essential passion of just getting even. And that's where it's going to be a tension. I already sense it. It's there because we're people. Look, government exists because we have a need as humans to be led. What we're trying to do is say, well, there's a right way to be led and a wrong way. We say democracy is the right way, where people have as much power as possible, and yet there's a government that removes the chaos, provides some kind of regularity to our lives. And that's what we're trying to hold on to. At the same time, part of the human condition is to want revenge, and it's a matter of fighting those passions. At the same time, we acknowledge the need to be led, and the question of what's the best way to do that.
Okay, over here.
Roseanne, you're right. Yes, we did. Thanks mostly to federal funding of his businesses.
Absolutely. How do we regard what you're talking about, equity, in terms of a totally inequitable way that resources get divvied up? Because now he has more money than the next 5 people behind
Right,
him.
right.
And
Wait,
they have more money than the next 90%. So how can we reconcile those inequities with what you're talking about?
yeah. So this is a uniquely American dilemma that we're in, but you'll also see it in areas, certainly in parts of Asia and around the world. It's the history teaches us a lot about this. We can go back and read about, in American history, the robber barons of 130 years ago. But today's trillionaires are so much wealthier than the robber barons were of 100 years ago. And it's, our systems aren't working. Our systems aren't working because the Supreme Court is not fulfilling its oath to the Constitution. The executive is not fulfilling its oath to the Constitution. Part of the fabric of the outline of how democracy is supposed to work in the U.S. isn't working. And it's been failing for about the last 15, 20 years with the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, and it's only gotten worse since then. And that's part of my message of saying, watch for the little things that you kind of blow off and say, oh, that's just one court decision, or that's just that. But one thing happens, and then another, and another, and it's like lining up dominoes, and you just hit the first one. And that's what we're trying to do now, is stop the dominoes from continuing to follow. That's why I say, for Korea, be observant, pay attention to warning signs, do what you can to stop them before it becomes another domino and another and another. You can teach students this in the classroom, just heighten their awareness.
Let's take one last question, because we are running out of time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guy, for your insightful lecture. My question has to do with making equity a governance outcome. For that to be possible, we have to change the laws and we have to change the processes and procedures. But in most democracies, there's a reluctance to reform the laws. So, because that is the case, how can we in the academy and then as public administrators change that to ensure that we can keep equity as a governance outcome? Thank you.
You know, I've always been a firm believer in pilot projects. You find where there is a community, or in the U.S., a state, where there is a readiness for equity, and you go hard there, and you put in place processes, procedures, laws. And having 50 states allows us to do that. And in fact, we're seeing that, and the states are beginning to diverge pretty dramatically in terms of the most conservative states and the most progressive states. But as you go where there's an opening, if you see a glimmer of light, go through it. If there's a readiness for equity in whatever domain you're concerned about, whether it's environmental issues or transportation issues or budgeting issues or gender issues or urban versus rural, but when there is a readiness, you go for it. You go right through that door. Put in place what you can. If it works, great, you can hold it up as an example. If it doesn't work, you tried, look for something else. It's just constant vigilance and working, but looking for the open door. You can't do everything all at once. So you'll look where there's a readiness.
Yeah, I'll have to wrap it up here.
Okay?
We can continue our discussion over dinner. So thank you all for coming today, and thank you very much for Professor Guy for a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you.